everyone. Welcome to Friday's story time. We're on chapter 14. We're nearly at the end of the book. We've read so much of it, so we might even find out what's going to happen today. Chapter 14 is called The Headmaster in Control. And if you remember, the gang had just been caught in the boiler room, and the headmaster was standing at the door with Rose and Jeff on either side of him. Let's see what happens. For a whole minute there was complete, horrified silence in the crowded boiler room. Then the headmaster said very quietly, "The fuse is back." "We won't!" Ingrid shouted. "You're evil and wicked, and we won't do anything to help you." The headmaster smiled. "I think you will." He raised his voice slightly. "Children, come along to the door." There was a tramping of feet in the corridor outside, and suddenly the space behind the headmaster was full of faces with blank, glazed eyes. 30 or 40 hypnotised children. "We'd better do it," Ian groaned, "otherwise they'll just make us. Come on, everyone." Despairingly, they began to push the fuses back into the box. Then Harvey switched on the main supply again, and they were all blinking in the sudden glare of the light. "That's better," said the headmaster in a satisfied voice. "Now we had better repair the rest of the damage you have done. Rose, where are all the teachers?" "I saw Mandy and Ingrid lock them into the swimming pool." "And the prefects, Jeff?" "Locked in their room," Jeff said. The headmaster nodded and glanced back at the miserable members of Splat. "I have had you watched, you see. I am not entirely stupid. The only thing I did not know was what had happened to the camera crew. But from what I heard as we arrived, I would guess that they are shut up in the old quarry. If you are sensible, you will hand over all the keys to me. Now." Sullenly, Lloyd, Ian, and Mandy tossed the keys onto the floor. At a signal from the headmaster, Rose and Jeff scooped them off and ran away down the corridor. The headmaster did not speak again until the sound of their feet had died away. Then he stepped further into the room and looked at Dinah. "I think," he said, "that we had better discuss what is going to happen next." "I know what you want," Dinah said stiffly. "You want me to win the great school quiz for you, so that you can have a chance to hypnotise everyone in the country. Well, I won't do it. If it's the only way to stop you, I'll make sure I get all the questions wrong." The headmaster raised his eyebrows. "You have worked everything out very cleverly. I can see that I have not overestimated your intelligence. But you have underestimated my determination. You cannot refuse to do what I want." "Can't I?" Dinah stepped forward belligerently, but the headmaster did not look at the least worried. Turning to the children massed in the doorway, he snapped at them in a brisk voice. "Listen to my orders. In front of you are 6 straw dolls. They are no longer needed. You will advance on them and—" he drew a deep breath, "you will tear them to pieces." Simultaneously, all the children swiveled their eyes to look into the boiler room. They showed no signs of recognition. It was plain that they were seeing precisely what they'd been told to see. As they started to advance, Dinah watched Lucy, who was in the middle of the front row. Her face was as calm and cheerful as if she'd been going to pick daisies. Knowing it would be no use, Dinah began to yell at her as the children marched into the boiler room. "Lucy, it's me, Dinah, and there's Lloyd and Harvey and the others. You can't hurt us." "She won't hear you," the headmaster said icily. "She is programmed to listen to me, and only me, and the prefects." Dinah and the others cowered against the wall behind them as the children came steadily tramping towards them. "Think, Dinah, think!" Lloyd yelled. "There must be some way out of this, otherwise they'll kill us." The foremost children had reached them now. Slowly they raised their arms, hands outstretched like claws. "Oh, help!" Harvey yelled. "Someone help!" The claw-like hands grabbed. Dinah found her blazer gripped firmly by Lucy, and she heard Mandy's blouse rip. From beside her, Ingrid wailed, "Oh, I'm frightened!" More and more hands were pulling at them. Glancing across the room, Dinah saw the headmaster smiling calmly, no sign of wavering. Coldly, she realised that he would not relent. If he had to kill them, he would kill them. As someone started to tug at her hair, she shouted, "All right, I'll do it. Whatever you say, just stop them." At once, with a triumphant smile, the headmaster said softly, "Stop, children." Slowly the arms dropped. Mandy gave a quick gasp of relief, and Harvey drew a sobbing breath. "You'll be in the quiz?" the headmaster murmured. Dinah nodded, hanging her head. "And you will win?" "If that's what I have to do." "Very well." The headmaster's mouth twisted in an unpleasant expression. "But do not suppose that I shall be so foolish as to trust you. Your friends will be in the hall, surrounded by these children. If you break your promise, all I have to do is to say, 'Destroy the dolls,' and they will be dead. Is that clear?" Dumb with despair, Dinah nodded again. Beside her, she heard Lloyd's familiar snort, comforting in its ordinariness. "We may not be able to stop you," Lloyd said scornfully, "but we still think you're wicked, wicked and pathetic. Fancy being prepared to kill us, just for money." For the first time, the headmaster looked startled. "What do you mean?" "That's what you're after, isn't it?" Lloyd said stoutly. "You want to hypnotise everyone so that you can get their money and be the richest man in the world. Well, I think it's pathetic." To their amazement, the headmaster suddenly flung back his head and laughed, soundlessly and horribly. When he stopped, he shook his head at them sadly. "Money? Oh, yes, I should be really pathetic if that was all I wanted. No wonder you have been my enemies. No wonder you think I am wicked." "Well, you are, aren't you?" Ingrid said stoutly. He shook his head at her again. "No, I am not wicked. My plans are for the good of everyone." His voice rose almost hysterically. "My plans are glorious and splendid." "But you aren't going to tell us what they are," said Dinah. "You will see soon, very soon now." He looked round at them all. "And when you do, you will understand how wrong you have been. Until then, I must remember that it is the fate of great men always to be misunderstood. Now, let's go to the hall." They began to walk along the corridor, the headmaster gripping Dinah's shoulder, and the others marching in the middle of the crowd of hypnotised children. As she walked, Dinah was thinking busily. What was it that the headmaster wanted? He at least must believe that it was good. But what was it? In the hall, everything was in chaos. The television men had just arrived and they were leaping about at high speed, hanging lights, positioning microphones, and connecting wires. In the centre of it all, a wiry figure with a crop of purple curls was dancing wildly from place to place. "Come on, lads!" Eddie Hare was shouting. "You can just do it if you work hard." The headmaster walked straight up the middle of the hall, with all the children following. Dinah saw his face twitch with distaste as he stared round at the crazy scene. Then he forced a jovial smile and tapped Eddie Hare on the arm. "Ah!" With a scream, Eddie Hare fell to the ground as if he'd been shot. "You got me!" He lay on the floor, looking up at the headmaster. "I beg your pardon," the headmaster said gravely. "I didn't mean to startle you." "Good for the soul being startled," chuckled Eddie Hare. "Nothing like the unexpected for keeping people on their toes." As he said the last word, he bounded to his feet. "What can I do for you, oh master?" "Do you want me to bring the school into the hall yet?" "Why not? Why not?" Eddie Hare flapped a hand. "Good for the lads here to have an audience, and I don't suppose they'll be finished until 30 seconds before the show starts. No time to set the audience up then. Yes, get the kids in now, and have your quiz team ready at the side of the stage. But make sure they're all quiet. We don't want a racket." "Oh, yes," said the headmaster, with an amused smile. "I think I can assure you that all my pupils will be perfectly quiet. Dinah stood at the side of the stage, out of range of the cameras, with the rest of the children taking part in the quiz. It did not occur to her to wonder who would be picked to make up the rest of the team. Now she discovered that it was to be Rose and Lucy. Rose was her usual unpleasant self, but Lucy, woken out of her hypnotized trance, was bubbling with excitement, hardly able to keep quiet. She grinned merrily at Dinah. It was all that Dinah could do to grin back. You nearly killed me an hour ago, she thought, but looking at Lucy now, she found it impossible to believe. And if she could barely believe it, who else would? The Manor Road quiz team had just arrived, and Lucy smiled at the boy with glasses. You're Alec Bates, aren't you? She whispered. I saw you on television last week. You were very good. The boy grinned back at her cockily. I've been practicing since then. I'm even better now. You'll never beat us. One of the sound engineers frowned at them and wagged a finger. Shh, he said loudly. The show's about to start. As the first notes of the opening music filled the hall, Dinah craned her neck to see what was going on. In the front row of chairs were the other members of Splat, surrounded by wooden-faced children, all ready to attack them if the instruction was given. She shuddered and looked sideways at the headmaster, who was next to her. He began staring across the stage. Out there, Eddie Hare had begun a fight with a giant plateful of spaghetti, and the spaghetti was fighting him back, huge white strands slapping slimily around his neck and spoonfuls of sauce splattering messily all over the stage. The headmaster's face was white. His fingers twitched, and he looked as though he were going to be sick. He can't stand it, Dinah thought suddenly. Mess actually makes him ill. Somehow that thought was rather comforting. At least he had weaknesses. The knowledge made her feel bold, and in a very soft voice she asked the question that had been bothering her for days. If you hadn't got me into the school, how would you have arranged to win the quiz? The headmaster dragged his eyes away from the stage and glanced at the other team. I should have hypnotized them and make them lose, he murmured. But I shan't have to do that now, shall I? No, no, of course not, Dinah said quickly, afraid. But she was not too afraid to risk another question. And what will you do after you've had your minute on television? But he just smiled at her and turned back to the stage with a shudder. Eddie Hare had started to fling pepper at the spaghetti. He had 3 or 4 huge scarlet pepper pots with black stripes, and he was shaking them frantically, spraying showers of pepper everywhere. And the spaghetti was sneezing. Its pale strands whirled everywhere like the arms of an octopus. Dinah was left to wonder desperately what was going to happen. She was so deep in her own thoughts that she jerked with shock when the sound engineer prodded her. Quick, he said, onto the stage. What? Didn't you hear? The quiz is about to start. Chapter 15. The Great School Quiz. Lloyd, slumped in his chair at the front of the hall, watched as the 2 teams filed out. The stage was a disgusting mess. Bits of spaghetti, broken eggs, and torn paper lay all over the floor. On Dinah's chair lay one of the huge scarlet pepper pots which Eddie Hare had used in his fight with the spaghetti. Lloyd saw Dinah pick it up and put it on the table in front of her, while the headmaster, with an expression of revulsion, kicked away a squashed banana from near his foot. Ghastly, isn't it? Eddie Hare said cheerfully. The country must be in a mess when a show like this is so popular. He began to explain the rules of the quiz. 10 questions for each team, with 30 seconds to answer, if you can. Dinah sat in her chair and her hands clasped on the table in front of her. On her face was an expression of complete, total wretchedness. It's worse for her than it is for us, Lloyd thought suddenly. We've only got to wait, but she's got to help him win. He felt a sudden burst of pity for her and was surprised at himself. Was he going soft? Right. Eddie Hare reached the question paper. Manor Row School first, and it's a real brainbuster. King Zonk of Zoldovia has 100 children. 90% of them have curly noses. 85% of them are bald. 80% of them have one leg and 75% of them lisp. How many bald, one-legged, lisping children with curly noses must he have? Wow, thought Lloyd, but Alex Bates was already smiling confidently and scribbling on the paper in front of him. A moment later he had answered. 30! Right, yelled Eddie Hare. And how pretty their holiday snaps must look. 1 point to Manor Road. Next question to the home team. And here it is. Every room in my house has as many old women in it as there are rooms altogether. Every old woman knits as many knee warmers as there are old women. I share the knee warmers out among 7 of my worst enemies, giving each the same number and as many as possible, and I still have more than enough to cover my knees. How many have I got? Dinah picked up the red pepper pot in front of her and stared thoughtfully at its black stripes, but she did not bother to write anything down. 6, she said in an unhappy voice. The headmaster gave a pleased smile as the scores drew level, and Lloyd felt a cold shudder creep up his back. Only another 9 questions each, and if they were no more trouble than that one, how could Dinah help winning? But he had not counted on Alec Bates. Alec was the only one of the Manor Road team who seemed to have any brains at all, but he was crammed with them. Every time Eddie Hare asked him a question, he gave the same conceited grin and scribbled away furiously on his piece of paper, and every time his answers were right. When the score stood at 8-8, Lloyd suddenly realised that it could be a draw. What would happen then? The headmaster had obviously realised it too. He was frowning and staring at Alec as the next question was asked, as if he were willing him to fail. Right, smart Alec, Eddie Hare said sarcastically. How about this one? I have a certain number, made up entirely of sevens, one 7 after another, and I can divide it by 199. I want you to give me the last 4 digits of the answer, but, and here's the catch, folks, I'm not going to tell you how many 7s make up the number. Alex stared at him. Eddie Hare did not say anything else, just turned and looked at the big clock behind him, where the second hand was ticking down from 30 to 0. 5 seconds left, he said at last. Come on, genius. What's the answer? I don't know, Alex said as the bell sounded. He did not sound embarrassed, only furious. And the score is still 8-8. Eddie Hare jumped off his barrel and turned a quick cartwheel. Goodness me, the excitement's mounting here. What about our other genius? Will she be able to answer her question? Dinah looked at him, white-faced, and beside her the headmaster smiled triumphantly. She gripped the pepper pot hard between her hands until the knuckles showed white, and glanced across at Lloyd and Harvey, Mandy and Ygritte. When she answered the question, Lloyd could almost feel her reluctance. The score was 9-8 to them now. My! Eddie Hare looked out over the hall and then raised his eyebrows at the headmaster. What a quiet lot of children you have here. It's the first time your team has gone into the lead. Why aren't they cheering? The headmaster shrugged. They can cheer if you want them to. He raised a hand, and instantly, obediently, all the children in the hall started to cheer loudly and enthusiastically. Then he dropped his hand, and they stopped at once. Eddie Hare gave him an odd look. That's remarkably well organised. I've never seen a school like it. He grinned at the cameras, baring his uneven yellow teeth. It's a good thing these bossy teachers don't run the country, isn't it, folks? They'd have us all doing what they want, like robots. And where would I be then? He chortled merrily, but the headmaster's face gave a sudden irritated twitch. And all at once, Lloyd understood. That was it. That was what the headmaster wanted, to run the whole country, so that it was as organised and joyless as the school, so that everything was neat and tidy and there was no freedom. He looked frantically at Dinah, wishing there was some way he could tell her. But as his eyes met hers, he knew that there was no need to tell her. She had understood too. Her mouth had dropped open and her eyes were stretched wide in complete horror. As the cameras turned towards the Manor Road team, waiting for the next question, she began to mouth furiously at Lloyd. "That's what the prefects were talking about," she said soundlessly. "He's got them all set up to move people into work camps and—" Her mouthing became faster and more desperate, and Lloyd lost track of what she was saying, but he did not need to know any more. It was too terrible to even think about. It would be like having school everywhere with no escape. The headmaster had seen her too. He frowned and pointed down into the hall, straight at the members of Splat. Then he looked at Dinah, his eyebrows raised in a question. Miserably, she shook her head. Lloyd could just imagine how trapped she was feeling. Now she knew what the plan was. She could still do nothing to stop it, not without killing them all. And I'm going to leave it there for today. The excitement is mounting. We'll have to find out next week what is going to happen. How will they save the situation? And next week we will have to choose a new story. That'll be exciting. I'll see what I can find. Have a lovely weekend, everyone. Take care.